I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old's Oscar Countdown. And this week we're going to be looking at two categories, the Best Original and Adapted Screenplay categories, giving my thoughts on my predictions, what I think is going to get into the race at this time, as well as a couple of possible contenders for both categories. Having a lot of fun with the series, but you always know once we start to double up on some of these episodes, we're into the thick of Oscar season, and here we are coming up a few weeks away now also from some of the award shows, and seeing a lot of these movies now come out, and myself having seen a bunch of them, we can finally kind of have an understanding of how good they are or how they kind of fit into the race. And you guys have been showing a lot of support for these videos, so I really do appreciate that. Just at the top, please do continue to comment below and let me know your thoughts and your comments. Start to subscribe to the channel now, just because within the coming weeks I'm going to start uploading multiple videos a week, so I want to make sure that you don't miss those videos. But as always, there should be always a video at Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern. And if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is break down a different Oscar category, give my 5 predictions in depth with lots of analysis for each one, as well as a couple of possible contenders to ultimately help you decide your own predictions. Feel free to use the timestamps in the description below to jump around to hear my thoughts on individual movies. That is absolutely encouraged. But if you want to hear my thoughts to everything, sit down, because this one is going to be a little bit of a longer one because we've got 2 categories here, but still I'm going to try to make it as brief and concise and as accurate as possible. So without further ado, let's jump into things. Starting off with the Best Original Screenplay category, my first prediction is going to go to Anora. We'll keep this one brief just because we've talked about this in other videos, but I do think this is the frontrunner to win Best Picture. I think its strength is its script. Very funny dialogue, very memorable characters, great ending. And one thing that I want to talk about at the very top of this video, and this applies to Anora, but applies to a lot of my picks, is the sense of having a singular writer being very important. We talked about on last week's episode how when the director also wrote the movie, that gives the director's branch a sense of authorial voice, that they actually wrote the script and they're directing it, so it feels like that's that director's movie. The same thing sort of applies to the writing branch as well, where they really prefer writers who are the sole credited writer on the movie. When you think of something like The Social Network, you think of that as an Aaron Sorkin script that was directed by David Fincher. So I actually went back over the past 10 years, I went back to the original screenplay category and tried to figure out, on average, how many writers did a movie have? And with removing one outlier year, it was an average of 1.5. That is to say, a script that gets nominated for the Oscars has an average of 1.5 writers per movie. So oftentimes it's one writer, or maybe there's 2 writers. And oftentimes when it is a movie like that has 2 writers, it's Bradley Cooper and Josh Singer for something like Maestro. Oh, Bradley Cooper's also the director. He's just kind of co-writing the movie with another writer. Almost always, the Academy over and over prefers singular writers because it has that sense of authorial voice, because there's a sort of sense of vision and that they kind of created the story, rather than it having 6+ writers and a bunch of people did rewrites on it and passes on it. It feels more like a machine, a corporate kind of an instinct, versus someone who just wrote down, write a script, and then boom, they decided to film that. I think there's a little bit more romanticization about that, and also a sense of authorial voice. So definitely something that we have to keep in mind, and definitely something that applies to Anora, combined with it also being a likely Best Picture nominee and frontrunner right now. So definitely I think Sean Baker is in the lead right now to win this category, but also to get nominated. Then with my second prediction, I went with The Brutalist. This is a movie that feels like a real biopic. It's very well researched. It feels like it's a real true person, so I feel like that element of the movie will be rewarded to the script. We also see movies that have multiple acting nominations, like I think this movie will have, and Felicity Jones and Guy Pearce and Adrian Brody. Oftentimes those movies also get nominated for the screenplay because the actors have to say those words and bring those words to life and have great performances. Oftentimes you need to have some great dialogue as well. So The Brutalist, its main focus isn't on the script. It's more of a directorial achievement. That being said, I still think it's going to be a very popular movie at the Oscars, and it's one of the frontrunners to win Best Picture, so I think it will definitely get nominated for screenplay as well. Then with my third prediction, I went with A Real Pain. And this is a movie that right now I'm still predicting to get nominated for Best Picture, but even if you don't think it's going to get nominated for Best Picture, I think you should consider it as a potential Best Picture contender. Being campaigned by Searchlight, usually see one Sundance movie a year. It will play well on streaming services, so you expect to have it to have a long kind of a length and be popular within the Academy. But why am I focusing on it getting nominated for Best Picture? Well, because the screenplay category and the Best Picture category have a direct correlation. I went back over the past 10 years and tried to find what movies got nominated for Best Picture that did not get nominated for Best Screenplay. And on average, there are 1.7 movies every year that get nominated for Best Picture that don't get in for Screenplay. So the reverse of that is most movies that get nominated for Best Picture also get nominated for Best Screenplay, which is why I'm focusing on that part of the aspect here for the screenplay video. Because if these types of movies that get nominated for screenplay, oftentimes they get nominated for Best Picture as well, but oftentimes, even if it doesn't get nominated for Best Picture, it's usually a contender. So a movie like The Lost Daughter will get nominated for Best Picture. I think that year was probably 11, 12 on the outset of maybe getting nominated. Ultimately didn't, but, still got in for screenplay. So when we're trying to make our screenplay predictions, I think you have to kind of pepper in a lot of movies that you think are going to get nominated for Best Picture, like Anora, like The Brutalist, or movies that you think may get nominated or may not get nominated, but at least will be in the conversation, and that's a movie like A Real Pain. And then all the other things about the movie are important as well. I think it's got some really interesting dialogue. It's got a lot of speeches. The strength of the movie is the kind of story and the performances, less so, say, like the visuals. So the kind of funny dialogue that they have, but also some of the more serious, intense, some speeches are very written. And I think the Academy, especially if you appreciate this movie, will really connect to the script as being the strong suit of the movie. Then my fourth pick, I'm going to go with The Seed of the Sacred Fig. This is another movie that I think is a possible contender to get nominated for Best Picture. I said so all the way back in October, and I still think that's the case. Some people may think of this movie and go, oh, that's kind of a weird international movie. They're not going to nominate that for screenplay. Well, they've actually been really, in the past few years, the Academy's been really more willing to nominate international movies in the screenplay category. Think of movies like Worst Person in the World, or even something like Roma, or The Zone of Interest. These are, movies that aren't in the English language, but in a way, I think that almost gives them a benefit. Let's not forget last year, Anatomy of a Fall won this category. And I say it's a benefit because it's not in the English language, because the actual words are on the screen, so they feel like even more important to the movie. And also you can physically read the words on the page almost at the bottom of the screen with the subtitles for many English members of the Academy, which most of them do speak English. So there's an extra emphasis of the dialogue over the words. So we've seen actually an increase in almost a surprising increase when we see surprises in this category. Like, I didn't predict The Zone of Interest. I didn't predict Worst Person in the World. They come from the international movies. So I don't want to, not predict an international movie this year. And then also this is a movie like something like, I would say, Worst Person in the World, where it's not a weird European art house movie with no dialogue. It's actually more like a Worst Person in the World or a Asghar Farhadi movie. And just how kind of tense and thrilling the movie can be, kind of starting off as a human drama and then becoming a little bit more of almost a crime movie in the last third. So it's got a kind of an interesting script and how things evolved, very original in that sense, and keeps you engaged and thrilling and interested. So there's benefits to the script as well. And I think that if it does well, critics groups, like I expect it to do in terms of getting some recognition, I think it could potentially even get in for director and screenplay, international feature, and then picture as well. I still consider this, a definite possible contender for Best Picture. I know some people, we're starting to see Wicked, and we're starting to see maybe A Complete Unknown, and we're boosting that up, and Gladiator 2, and that's kind of knocked people, certain movies down, like Blitz, like Seed of the Sacred Fig, but I still think Seed of the Sacred Fig is at least a contender for Best Picture, as well as something like Screenplay, so that's why I have it in here, as well as the content of the film. Then in my final slot, I'm gonna go with The Substance. And I haven't been very kind to The Substance in terms of a movie with Oscar chances. I had it as a possible contender for Demi Moore. I didn't have Coralie Farget as a possible contender for director, but she definitely is. But I am going to have it in screenplay. I think that makes the most sense here, because I think it's maybe a little bit too weird for the Academy, so they're not going to nominate in a huge category like Best Picture. But The original screenplay category has always been a little bit more cool than the Best Picture category. They'll nominate more critically acclaimed movies, a little bit weirder movies over the years. So May December, or First Reformed, or like I said, Worst Person in the World. Those are a little bit more critics-focused, cooler movies. They'll get nominated for screenplay, but then maybe nothing else, because the writers in particular appreciate kind of originality and uniqueness. And The Substance is one of the most unique movies of the year. I also think that, the direct comparison to this movie would be a movie like Titane, which won at Cannes and, did very well in terms of Cannes, and then didn't do very well at the Oscars. But that movie was in another language and didn't have any kind of American stars. I think there's a benefit to a movie like The Substance, which is strange and body horror and not for everyone, yes, but it's absolutely unique, absolutely has good world building in the movie. There's a sense of internal logic that I think makes a lot of sense, and that sci-fi kind of an aspect really works for the movie. And also, it's in English, and it has many recognizable American stars, which will just allow the movie to be seen by a wider group of people. More people will be interested. And I've been very impressed with how well the movie did at the box office, as well as how it's kind of stayed on VOD and memes, and people really seem to respond to this movie outside of just the kind of film cultural circles. It does seem to have expanded a bit to be a little bit more of a cooler kind of a movie into the mainstream outside of just hardcore movie fans. And it's still a festival movie that played at Cannes and played at TIFF, and it's not this small, weird, obscure horror movie. It is a horror movie. These movies don't typically get nominated, but I think there is a uniqueness to the premise of this movie and a coolness that the writers branch of the Academy usually likes to kind of go for in this kind of final slot. So I think The Substance has a real shot to get nominated, and that's why I have it here as my 5th slot. Then some possible contenders. My first one is going to be September 5. I was lucky enough to catch an advanced screening of this movie, so that was in part the reason why I decided to leave it out of my predictions. It is a very entertaining, very solid docudrama, but I think the thing that makes it special is its editing, its pace, its whip pans, its sense of tension, and kind of constantly moving without thinking about consequences, kind of what the movie is about. So it's more so a movie that with less kind of big speeches and great dialogue, and more about the people doing their jobs and great insert shots and kind of very accurate and realistic, I think, kind of newsroom during the situation. But it's not heavily written, and I don't think when you think about the movie you go, oh yeah, there was this really great line of dialogue, or there's this really great speech for this actor. Ultimately, I think, though, that this is a movie like Dark Waters from a few years ago, the Todd Haynes movie, or The Mauritanian, the Jodie Foster movie from a few years ago. This is just kind of a really well-done docudrama that doesn't have enough things that are super flashy, particularly with the writing, to get in and ultimately nominated in original screenplay. And then my other possible contender quickly is Hard Truths by Mike Leigh. Mike Leigh hasn't been nominated in over 10 years, so I think that's why I'm less confident that this movie will get nominated. I think it could get celebrated by the critics, and if it does, that could definitely boost its chances, but sometimes we see critics' picks like First Cow not show up in this category either. Also being campaigned by a smaller studio in Bleecker Street, going up against Mubi in The Substance or Paramount in September 5, so definitely an uphill battle in that sense. And I'm not sure, because Mike Leigh hasn't been nominated in over 10 years, if his brand of filmmaking is still really well appreciated. And so I know he's mostly seen as a writer, and this one's definitely got a great script with some very, blunt conversations, and it's very written in the best way possible for a Mike Leigh movie. I just don't know if it's going to be seen by enough people to have enough of a passionate fan base to kind of push it over the edge. Now let's talk about the Best Adapted Screenplay category, with my first pick going to go to Conclave. This is a very likely Best Picture nominee, and a movie with its script being its strength. Now, this was directed by Edward Berger. It wasn't written by him, but it was also only written by one person, Peter Strawn. So definitely think there's an authorial voice there to the movie. It's also a movie that has lots of great twists and turns. Like I said, it is the strength of the movie, the kind of what's going to happen, the twists ending, and the twists and turns that happen along the way, and the kind of battling for power that goes on in the movie. Very entertaining, very engaging. So I think definitely with a movie that has likely nominated to be Best Picture, and its script is its strength, very good shot at it getting nominated here and potentially even winning. Then in my second pick, I went with Sing Sing. This is a movie that I still think can do very well if it gets nominated for Best Picture, as to potentially even winning. I think it could be the kind of coda of this year, the feel-good movie. And it's a movie that not necessarily focus so much on script and dialogue, but there is a sense of authenticity, there's a sense of realism to the movie, and that comes from the script, and particularly kind of sense of adaptation, because we're in the adapted screenplay category. The fact that there are so many of the real men who the story is about are also in this movie. There's a great sense of adaptation there because it's coming directly from their mouths, and a sense of authenticity to the story because they're involved with it. So they would say if something was, not authentic, for example. So it's actually a great form of adaptation that I think will be well appreciated, even if the script isn't as flashy as something like a Conclave. Then with my third prediction, I went with Nickel Boys, and this is another movie that I think will be rewarded for its unique sense of adaptation. A quick, slight spoiler for Nickel Boys. If you don't want to hear anything about it, skip ahead about 10 seconds. But the movie is shot in the first person, so that choice was very unique to do it that way, and that sense of adaptation to see it in that point of view, this kind of very mercurial novel, I guess you would say, hard to adapt. The decision to adapt it in that way was a unique approach, and I think the right approach for this movie. So that, I think, will mostly be appreciated as a directorial achievement, which is why I have Ramon Ross in my nominees for Best Director, but could also just be instead appreciated as a genius idea on the page. I do worry a little bit, though, that the movie, because it was so improvised in certain aspects, won't be appreciated for its script, but I think it will be appreciated for its sense of adaptation more so than it is its writing on the page. And I think this movie will get nominated for Best Picture, or at least be in the conversation. We mentioned earlier how important that is in the Best Original Screenplay category, just because on average there's only 1.7 of the Best Picture nominees don't get nominated for Best Original Screenplay. So when you look at your Best Picture lineup, make sure that they're almost always nominated for Best Screenplay. And because I have Nickel Boys in my Best Picture lineup, I also have Nickel Boys nominated for Screenplay. And let's not forget, this is being campaigned by Amazon MGM, who had American Fiction last year and did enough campaigning to actually get that movie the win in this category. So Nickel Boys, they definitely know what they're doing for this category, and I think Nickel Boys can be that kind of a big, critically acclaimed movie that gets in some of these categories, like a script, like a director, like a picture, maybe even someone like an Ingenue Ellis-Taylor for supporting actress. Then in my fourth slot, I went with Emilia Pérez. People have started to see this movie, and I've seen a lot of kind of backlash on the internet circles of a Letterboxd and Twitter and Reddit and all that good stuff. But that was kind of expected. This was a movie I saw months ago at TIFF and knew that it was going to be divisive, and it has been. But what I've seen from a lot of people as well is because they don't like the movie personally, they've been taking it out of their lists, and I think that's a really poor decision. I think it's still going to get nominated for Best Picture, and Zoe Saldana and Carla Sofia Gascon. I really do think it's going to be a big Oscar movie. But where I've seen it also kind of be removed in a lot of categories is the screenplay category, because maybe they don't like the screenplay or think it's a little bit stupid or it's not representative. And I think this is an important lesson in terms of removing your bias. Every year, I've been doing this now, this is the 9th season, doing it for over 8 years. There's always one movie that people kind of revolt against, whether it's Don't Look Up or Vice or Maestro. Every year there's one movie that people go, oh, it's such a terrible movie, I'm not going to predict it in anything. And it always sweeps in a lot of Oscar categories, and people are always surprised. I think this year it's going to be Emilia Pérez. Now I have it in my fourth slot because I don't think it's a guarantee to get nominated. Musicals don't really get nominated. Also, like, the script, I think, is probably the weakest part of the movie. That being said, the script is also, I think, a part of the movie that people appreciate the most, which is its boldness, which is the fact that it is kind of 3 movies in one because it's so unique. And we talk about that with the original screenplay category, but it also still applies as well to Best Adapted Screenplay, where sometimes people just appreciate boldness and uniqueness and trying something different. And that's exactly what Jacques Audiard is doing here with Emilia Pérez. Now you can debate whether or not it's, super accurate or a well-done approach and a made huge swing. But it's still a swing, and I think the Academy over and over will appreciate the boldness, the uniqueness of the script. Oftentimes when you talk about movies, they get 3+ nominees in the acting categories, like this movie can. they almost always get nominated for script as well. There's a direct correlation there between getting nominated for a screenplay category and acting. It'd be very weird if you got 3 acting award nominations and no screenplay nomination, because what were the actors, basing their performances on? So that's why there's, I think, a connection there. And I think this movie is also pretty guaranteed to get nominated for Best Picture. Netflix this is their big movie this year. They're campaigning this movie. They're not really campaigning The Piano Lesson. This is where their resources are going. So you have a movie that is going to get acting nominations, that's going to get in for Best Picture, that's unique and bold and creative in its premise. I think it's just, on paper, so much going for it. So I have to include Emilia Pérez in my nominations. Because regardless of what people say online, or regardless of your own personal opinion, when you're making predictions, you have to look at what historically accurate groups of people think. So we know that the TIFF audience is very historically accurate at predicting what's going to get nominated for Best Picture, for example. This got the TIFF runners-up prize. Cannes, that has international support, they love the movie. They gave it a bunch of prizes, particularly for acting. So we have a North American kind of audience group which really liked it, which have the kind of international audience group which definitely liked it. So I expect Academy voters to also like it as well. So like I said, try to remove some personal bias sometimes. Even if you don't like the movie, you have to make smart predictions if you want to kind of do well in terms of your overall nominations. And I think Emilia Pérez, at least on paper, has got a lot going for it. Then in my final slot for this category, I went with The Room Next Door. And I went with this movie because even though I haven't been very kind to the movie, I think that this is a perfect kind of slot for it. I haven't been nominated for Best Actress or for Best Director. Even though it's one of my favorite movies of the year, I don't think it's going to be a big Oscar movie. That being said, it still won the Golden Lion at Venice. It's still a movie by Pedro Almodovar, his first movie in English. Those things matter because past Golden Lion winners, Joker, Roma, Nomadland, Poor Things last year, all huge Oscar movies. So oftentimes the Golden Lion actually gets nominated for Best Picture in multiple categories. I don't think that's going to be the case here for The Room Next Door, just because it's a little bit more divisive than some of those other movies critically. So I don't think it's going to be super celebrated by critics. But that being said, even if we look at past movies that were celebrated of Pedro's movies, like Parallel Mothers, like Pain and Glory, they usually get in for the screenplay category and then maybe an acting category. But if they get it for something like acting, it's Antonio Banderas, and it's kind of a weak year for Best Actor anyways. So I just can't ignore the fact that this is a Pedro Almodovar movie, which is celebrated by a lot of people. It did win the Golden Lion at Venice. I don't think it's, you have to kind of put it in somewhere here. Is it going to get 0 Oscar nominations? That's a little bit surprising to me if that does happen. It could happen. That's why I have it here in the 5th slot. But it'd be so rare to have a Golden Lion feature film winner that doesn't get any Oscar nominations. It would be a little bit strange. That's not like a documentary or something that's contending in multiple categories. And also, if you've seen the movie, it's got a classic kind of Pedro script in this, what would you do in this scenario, how things evolve dramatically, are very kind of tense and interesting. So it's got a great script as well. And I think also because it's his first movie in English, more people are going to see it and more people are going to resonate with it, even more so than the Spanish scripts that he had. Now there is some questions about some of the dialogue and the stilted way that maybe the translation isn't always the best. He definitely could get points docked for that. But I think if you like the movie, that doesn't bother you, so you're going to nominate it anyways. I'm betting on Pedro being well respected within the Academy. I'm betting on this movie really being its script, as most Pedro movies, being its kind of strong suit, and at least in the conversation for some acting prizes. So usually there's a correlation there with acting and screenplay awards as well. Then my first possible contender is Dune Part 2. And this is a possible contender because the first movie got nominated, but all my instincts tell me not to nominate it. I think the first movie got nominated in 21 because it was a weak year and there were some added factors that were credited towards Dune. I think for a lot of people, Dune was an unadaptable book, so the fact that it was adapted the first time was really well appreciated by the Academy. Eric Roth, who was a very long time and past winner and past nominee, he gets nominated almost every time he writes a script. He was actually a screenwriter with the first movie. He's not the screenwriter for the second movie. So the fact that now with the second movie, you don't have that benefit of, wow, I can't believe you adapted this movie. We're going to credit you because it's an unadaptable book. they've already adapted it, so it's not as special anymore. It doesn't have Eric Roth, so it doesn't have that kind of a benefit of his fans getting nominated. If we're to compare this movie to Lord of the Rings, and we think that the third one's going to be the one that's celebrated the most, well, the first Lord of the Rings movie got nominated with Best Screenplay, but the second movie, The Two Towers, didn't get nominated for Adapted Screenplay. So maybe the same thing happens here with Dune. But also, I've seen the movie. This is a movie, Denis Villeneuve has said himself, is about the visuals. It's not really about the script. He doesn't really care what people say. He cares about the images of cinema. That's what he thinks of. So I'll be very surprised if the movie gets nominated. Although it is a possible contender, because I do think it's going to get nominated for Best Picture. The last one, the same sort of things you could say as well. It's a visual type of a movie. It still got nominated for Screenplay as well. But also that was a little bit of a weaker year, where Dune was competing with like Nightmare Alley or West Side Story, two other movies that are director-focused, whereas now he's competing with a movie like, I would say, The Wild Robot or The Room Next Door, where they are more script focused. So a little bit of lots of things kind of going against, I think, Dune Part 2 that left me, make me put it off the list. Then in my final possible contender, I just mentioned it being The Wild Robot, because I think this is a movie that, while not going to get nominated for Best Picture, is the clear front runner to win for Best Animated Feature. Interestingly, most animated movies have like multiple writers, but this movie only has one, the director, Chris Sanders. So there's still a sense of authorial voice for an animated movie, which is more rare. And I think it's just super well liked by critics, by audiences. It's very sweet. I'm also maybe considering this as a possible contender because I'm banking on the fact that people know this as an adaptation. People know this as a movie that is based on a series of books. So I think people will appreciate the fact that they're able to take a novel and adapt it in a 2-hour movie elegantly, and that makes a lot of sense. So that I think I'm betting on the fact that people will know that this is an adaptation. I'm betting on the fact that this is so well liked by so many people, and I'm betting on the fact that Chris Sanders is the sole writer of this movie, which gives this unique sense of authorial voice for an animated movie, which you don't see with most animated movies. With all that being said, though, I don't think it's going to get nominated in this category because I don't think it's going to get nominated for Best Picture. And I think it's going to be kind of ultimately deemed, oh, that's an animated movie. We'll celebrate that in the animated category. And it wasn't a huge phenomenon at the box office, so much so that we have to nominate it in some of these other categories, or we're so unique and creative and what an interesting idea for an animated movie. It is still pretty standard in its storytelling and some of its beats, but very emotionally effective and a great movie if you haven't seen it already. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please comment below. Let me know your thoughts on both the original screenplay category and the adapted screenplay category. I'd love to hear it. And stay tuned for next week, where I believe I'm going to be covering probably the best animated feature category, maybe cinematography. But this is what I'm talking about, where now we're going to have multiple videos a week. So definitely subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. But that's about it. Until next time. Stay tuned.